So, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. This is the promised series of three podcasts that I'm doing with my good friend Nathan DeLong, my co-conspirator in the Brunswick Independent Author Association, my former co-worker with the Bugle Observer in Woodstock, a great sports mind, a great hockey mind. And this is going to, I think Nathan can agree, it's going to be first of an annual tradition. We're going to be taking a podcast look at the new Hockey Hall of Fame inductees. Now, this year was a very eclectic group. Some very, very interesting international players that get in, some builders. But the three key ones we're going to be talking about is Vaclav Nedomansky, the great Czech national team member who was the first player to defect to the WHA in the last golden era of hockey in the 1970s. Haley Wickenheiser, a great Team Canada champion, many Olympic titles and world titles. But we're going to start today with somebody getting into the Hockey Hall of Fame. There's been some controversy, and I tell you why. There's an old joke in the media that if you play 10 seasons with the Montreal Canadiens, you're going to get in the Hockey Hall of Fame. And in this case, he didn't play 10 seasons. He played a little bit over 13. But for many fans of the Habs, it makes sense. For non-fans of the Habs, they're basically saying, well, he's probably could be the last of the modern Montreal Canadiens to get into the Hall. And of course, we're talking about the defensive stalwart, Guy Carbonneau. Now, here's a strange path of Guy Carbonneau to the Hockey Hall of Fame, and some Toronto Maple Leaf fans might know this if they grew up in the 70s and 80s. Carbonneau came to Montreal as a draft pick of the Chicoutimi Saguenay's of the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League in the last great goal-scoring era of the Q. Now, you wouldn't think a defensive player like Carbonneau, because he was comparable to Bob Gainey in a lot of ways, but a little bit more aggressive. He was a high third-round draft pick of the Montreal Canadiens, but get this, in 1979 and 1980s, two last years with the Saguenay, he scored 134 goals in two seasons, including 72 goals and 110 assists for 182 points in a 72-game season in 79-80. And that season, he was called up to the Montreal Canadiens Farm Club in Nova Scotia and played two games in the playoffs. And a lot of people believed he was going to be probably the next kind of Pierre Mondeau style sniper with the Montreal Canadiens. But after the 80-81 season with the Voyageurs, where he scored 35 goals, a lot of Montreal management pretty well had to make a decision. Bob Gainey was getting older. Some of the second and third line players in Montreal that he tried, including Normand Dupont and Danny Geoffrion, weren't working out. And they were looking at having a good goal scorer that also could play defensive. And here's where the controversy comes in, ladies and gentlemen. Two players were being looked at in the Montreal Canadiens to be the next offensive defensive star of the Montreal Canadiens, just like Bob Gainey. And I heard he wanted a francophone, my old colleagues of Journal de Quebec. They were looking at two players. There was a very, very good young prospect by the name of Dan Daoust, and of course Guy Carbonneau. Now, Dan Daoust, for people that follow the Leafs, he was eventually traded to the Leafs to make room for Carbonneau. There was some question in the Quebec media if Daoust would probably be a better defensive, offensive player for the Habs than Carbonneau, because Carbonneau had some difficulty in aggressive situations. Daoust seemed to be more of a grinder. When Daoust was traded, everybody said, well, we'll look and see how good Carbonneau is going to be. And this is what happened, ladies and gentlemen. By the 1984 season, Carbonneau fit in so well with the Montreal Canadiens defensive style that he almost pushed Montreal in the 1984 Stanley Cup final. 83-84, they were suffering from the Battle of Quebec just a couple of years previously. They needed a little bit more grit, a little bit more scoring, and Carbonneau fit on that. But what was interesting about Carbonneau, he could turn on his offense in certain key situations, but then turn on the defense. He was known for scoring 20-25 goals a year with the same amount of assists, points in very key situations, but he would limit the impact of a Mike Gartner, a Wayne Gretzky, a Messier, of all people, the Ron Duguay years, Ciccarelli for Minnesota. He would always be put on the line against the line of the best snipers of the other team, and it get kind of interesting because by the core of that rookie team of 85-86, combined with Carbonneau, combined with Patrick Roy, in 1986 Montreal overachieved, and we all know what happened there. They made it all the way to Stanley Cup Finals, played the Calgary Flames, and bet them in 5 games. Now, this is where the Hockey Hall of Fame, I think, was looking at. He reinvigorated Montreal's franchise, not on the offense, but the defense. Going back to Jules Tremblay, going back to the start of Bob Gainey, as good as Montreal's offense was, he needed solid defensive, offensive players to motivate the players, to stop the players in their team, and have a +1 in each contest. And I'll tell you why. Gretzky might get 2 goals or 3 goals against Montreal, but if Carbonneau's line, sometimes we would play, I think, with Skrugglin or Mike McPhee. It could be a varied amount of line mates. If I'm not mistaken, that was a few. If the other team got 3 goals, if they got 4, that's what Carbonneau was meant to do. Turn on the offense we need to, and turn on the defense. Now, as the seasons went on, 1989 was another opportunity to show Montreal's style. Made it against the Stanley Cup final, losing to Calgary. But as the years went on, late 80s, early 90s, Carbonneau again, the consistency on offense and defense, to motivate his fellow teammates, and he later became a head coach for the Montreal Canadiens and a big motivator for several squads. Carbonneau was a hockey mind in every shape or form. Now, the only problem I have with the Hockey Hall of Fame, there's more deserving players, and Nathan can talk a little bit about this, that should have gotten in the Hall before Carbonneau. But maybe they were looking at the 2 cups, the 1 in 93, the 89 run, the fact he was part of a growing Dallas Stars franchise in the late 90s that reestablished kind of that Western Conference dominant of the Stars. But overall, if you win 2 Stanley Cups, you're the best defensive player on the team for more than 10 years. You basically draw the best out of your line mates. You're a good leader on and off the ice. You know, it clicks all the boxes. If you need a 7 out of 10 to be in the Hockey Hall of Fame, he's a 7 out of 10. If there was better players that should have got in, that's up to the Hall to decide. But Nathan, we're talking about this. We know you're not a Montreal Canadiens fan, you're more of a Leafs fan.
Yeah.
Are you certain, you're not shocked he got in, but you're kind of surprised he never got in?
I'm surprised it took this long, yeah.
Yeah, so why do you think you're surprised it took so long? Because he's been retired now for over 15 years, 16 years.
Yeah, and I get that in most cases it takes a few years before you're eligible for consideration for the Hall of Fame after you announce your retirement, but he was arguably one of the better two-way players of his, or if not the best two-way player of his era. I mean, if that doesn't warrant Hall of Fame consideration, I really don't know what does. I mean, that's, I guess, the main reason I'm surprised it took them this long to induct him.
Well, you see, the 3 Selkes, like Nathan is talking about right now, but the NHL of 2019, it's more offensive than it's ever been. Probably.
It's also more defensive than it's ever been, and goaltenders are better than they've ever been, too.
Yeah, see, back in the day, ladies and gentlemen, it's a true story. There was no number 1 goalies on every team like we have now. Now we have goalies on teams that get 60 games, maybe a 2.5, 2.6 goals against average. What Carbonneau did, if he was on these games, and he was a very, very in-shape player, he was very rarely injured. I don't remember any time that Carbonneau lost any major playing time, except I think one season, and actually it was the Stanley Cup year, and that year he only scored 4 goals, but he was, like I said, such a presence on the team, but it seemed every time that Montreal needed a good goal or a good pass or a game 6 victory or a key victory on the road, Carbonneau had something to do with it, just like Bob Gainey. Now, for the French media, they will always tell you that every Montreal Canadien that has had an impact of a dynasty or a good run like Montreal. I consider the last great run of Montreal between, 84 and 93. 84 because he made it in the semifinals, 86 in the finals, 89 in the finals, 93 in the finals. But nowadays, there is no more Montreal dynasty. They're very, what do you call 5 games over 500 team.
Yeah,
40, 44, and 30 or whatever like that. They're not like a team that's going to make the semifinals or potential every year. Back in the day with Carbonneau and again Skrugglin, McPhee, Robinson was still around. Gainey was around for a while. Matt Snasen was around. Claude Lemieux, Corson, Richer, all these top players. They were 35 goal a year scorers on a team that needed a 50 goal scorer. He had one in Richer, but are always 1 or 2 players away from that last final Stanley Cup run. So for me, it basically helped the Montreal franchise stay relevant for maybe 5 or 10 years more than he should have, because after Guy Lafleur left in '84, they had no superstars. Richer for a couple of seasons, but he never had the legacy like of a shot to help him, or Lemaire, or Mahavlich. So now, from Nathan, from a perspective, is there any comparable players to him that are not in the Hall of Fame that should be in there, to your great study of the NHL?
I mean, I don't know if Pavel Datsyuk's been retired long enough to meet his eligibility, but at the same time, I mean, Pavel Datsyuk is arguably the Guy Carbonneau of the late 90s, early 2000s, back when Detroit had what some would call their dynasty, with the Red Wings winning cups in 97, 98, as well as in 02 during the tail end of Scotty Bowman's coaching career that was more than legendary by far. I mean, Patrice Bergeron is somebody in today's NHL who should be a first ballot Hall of Famer, but I mean, it's hard to say. There's all kinds of average players that have gotten in long before Guy Carbonneau that it's hard to say how it'll play out. But in terms of modern day NHLers who maybe should be there, I can speak to Pavel Datsyuk, who's probably one of the better two-way forwards since Guy Carbonneau, as well as Patrice Bergeron, who's won a cup and been to 2 cup finals with the Bruins.
You see, we're talking about that 10-point must system I have. I look at impact 2 points, longevity 2 points, being captain for a while, keeping a dynasty together. The only problem I have with Carbonneau is that I knew he was capable of scoring a lot more goals than he did. Carbonneau could have easily been a 40 goal a season guy, but for some reason he was so, not say obsessed, but I'd see certain games where I know he could score a second or third goal. He would never do it. Because the way it worked back then, ladies and gentlemen, this is a true story, and maybe Nathan doesn't remember this, but if Montreal won 3-1, that was just good as 7-1. Montreal became a defensive team, and like the 86 Cup run, most of those games were 1-0, 3-1, 4-1, whatever. Montreal didn't need to score a ton of goals because they had 3 lines that were defensive, and they had Bobby Smith and Scoglin, McPhee, and Lemieux and Corson and Richer and even Serge Boisvert, who scored, not too many goals, but some key goals. It just seems a different NHL. But for the trap system of the NHL,
yeah, I do remember that.
Carbonneau was a king of the trap because if you do best, and get this, ladies and gentlemen, it's a true story. I was listening to University of Maine hockey game, the last great Paul Career era. You remember that, when he won the national championships?
I do, yeah.
Okay. The announcer on the PBS station saying, "Oh, that guy is our Guy Carbonneau," and I was very shocked to hear that. For a U.S. announcer on a U.S. broadcast about a U.S. team talking about Guy Carbonneau like he was Bob Gainey, it was very interesting. And I know a lot of young players in the 90s and the 2000s were told by the coach, if you play more like Guy Carbonneau, you'll go places. So he kind of motivated a lot of people. A lot of people followed Guy Carbonneau's career had known nothing about Bob Gainey, because Bob Gainey was gone from the Montreal Canadiens, after the mid-'80s, and Carbonneau kept that mantle going. But I still remember Jacques Demers saying on TVA, he said, "I don't know how far we're going to go in the playoffs because Guy is not 100%. He wasn't talking about Guy Lafleur, ladies and gentlemen, or I call him the Guy Jr., Guy Carbonneau, Guy Lafleur Jr. So again, congratulations to Guy Carbonneau on getting in the Hall. Yet another Montreal Canadian. There's someone had a brain freeze the other day. He said Carbonneau's number should be retired by the Montreal Canadiens. Ladies and gentlemen, just because you get in the Hockey Hall of Fame, you don't have to go crazy about a player. I don't think Carbonneau's number should be retired. If anybody's number shouldn't be retired, I'm not going to get into it too much. But
I'm just going to add, though, that the more numbers you retire, the less numbers that'll be available for your current players to wear.
Because
how many numbers of the Habs retired already? I mean, come on.
Well, pretty well. You only have number under 16. You only have number 8. I think number 15 or something.
So yeah, there goes most of the single digits.
Yeah, you got Morin's number 7, number 9. But Jacques Lemaire said to me years ago in that famous conversation we had in Gambleton, he said if Carbonneau ever scores, we'll win the cup. And technically, he never started scoring, but the other team couldn't score on him. That's why he won the cup. So Nathan, part 1, thank you so much.
My pleasure, Jeffrey.
And I'm sorry to have a Maple Leaf fan to hear all this Hab history and Hab Nation history. There was a time, ladies and gentlemen, years ago when Canadian teams used to win the cup. Amazing. That's an amazing story. Say like Spielberg. Anyway, have a good morning. Bye.